And a word of prayer. Lord, thank you so much for today. We pray that you bless our time together as we discuss some of the things going on in the world and how they fit into the plan of Bible prophecy that you've laid out in Scripture. Bless us today in Jesus' name, amen. Well, today we're going to call this Flashpoint, and I did a midweek update. I talked about Ben Gavir's visit to the Temple Mount. I'm going to do that a bit more today, but I'm going to fill in some other parts of this. And we have some comments and different things. I just want to bring your attention to a few things, and these will be in no particular order. Excuse me one second here. I see that I have some things out of sequence on my... Excuse me one second as I not sure how those ended up there. Okay. Okay. So we talk each week about the convergence of events and how things seem to be coming together. A lot of different lines of Bible prophecy. And I think that this is one of the things we're going to see as we get closer. I say it every week, and I know people get tired of hearing it. This is my grid that I look at, ACLU, acceleration, convergence, logistics, and understanding. And so And the reason for this is we know there'll be an acceleration. For example, the pattern of prophecy, pattern in Jewish scripture is prophecy, or prophecy is pattern. So at the first coming of Jesus Christ, there were many, many prophecies about his first coming. But about 60% of those were fulfilled in that last week, from the time he rode into Jerusalem until his crucifixion and resurrection. So if that's what happened at Jesus' first coming, we can expect that this is going to happen at a second coming. There's also patterns in Scripture. I mean, the whole book of Genesis is a pattern of what's going to happen in the future. There's also, for example, I did a teaching on Ezekiel 23 a number of years ago, and that, I think, is a pattern. It shows the conflict between the northern and southern kingdoms, or how the northern and southern kingdoms were in conflict with God's plan. And I think that the fall of the southern kingdom and what was going on in Israel before the fall of the southern kingdom is also a pattern, I think, is how things are going to go at the end of this church age. For example, the southern kingdom had fallen into horrible apostasy. You can read about that in Ezekiel chapter 9. And while under one of the last kings, Manasseh, he did repent, and there was a bit of a revival. It was too late. And I think that might be a pattern as to what we might see here in the end time. A lot of people talk about, is there going to be a revival? Is there going to be a revival before the Lord comes? I don't really see it in Scripture, but it might be that there are a few people that were really big sinners that are going to have a revival. They're going to turn to the Lord, but I don't think it's going to be on a big scale. But so we're going to see this acceleration. We're going to see all of these things happening. So my view, for example, on the seals is that, and it may be a little bit different than other people, I believe like the first seal opens and it continues along all the way through this last period of time. All those events, it's not like the first seal here, then the second seal, then the third seal. They're going to be open, and the events that are described in those seals are all going to be happening at the same time. And the same way with trumpets, and I think the bowls are way at the end. But so this is so the logistics, convergence, logistics, understanding based on Daniel chapter 12. Now, today I'm going to talk a little bit about wars and rumors of wars. I'm going to talk about probably the biggest flashpoint of all is the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And we saw a lot of things going on with the Temple Mount. So I have a little bit about the history of the Temple Mount, some of the views of where the temple used to be or was, the two first and second temples. And I'll talk about that, and I'll kind of put it in context of what happened this week. But let's first let's look at some of these things that are happening with regard to the world. Okay, I've been getting asked a lot of questions about this. There's a case that's been docketed at the Supreme Court called Brunson versus Adams. This case is not so much an attack about the results of the time people went to the polls to make decisions back in 2020, and whether they're in allegations that there might have been fraud at that time. This case is to hold the people in charge accountable because they didn't investigate. And because you didn't investigate, you violated your oath of office. Because you violated your oath of office, you should be removed from office. So the case was filed, I think it was out in Utah. It was dismissed by the district court in late October. It went up on appeal to that Circuit Court of Appeals. It's in the federal system. And the court dismissed it. I think on October 22nd, the people that are handling the case then appealed it to the Supreme Court of the United States. And when you appeal a case to the Supreme Court of the United States, what you do is you file a petition for writ of certiorari, which is sort of a request that the Supreme Court review the case. So the Supreme Court in Ohio, we have a similar thing. If you're going up to the Supreme Court, you have to file a petition to get the court to review the case. You have to show the court, why is your case important? Why should we spend our time deciding your case? Why is it important? Is it going to settle law? Is there, for example, in the Supreme Court of the United States, are there conflicts between the circuits? And there are conflicts between the circuits on a whole host of things. But if it's a matter of great public importance, the Supreme Court will weigh in on it. For example, the Supreme Court decision in Obergefell back in June of 2015, where they said that the Constitution had, I guess, an implied right to any type of marriage, whatever you wanted. Well, same-sex marriage. Now, what the court didn't do, of course, was, well, why should it be limited to 2 people? Why can't it be 3 or 4? And of all, sort of a mix of everything. But they said, well, we'll recognize same-sex marriage. And they were able to because there was a conflict among the circuits. That was, in part, what was going on. Same way with the recent Dobbs decision and on the abortion issue. There was a conflict, all over the country about how this should be decided. And the Supreme Court said, well, we're going to overturn Roe, and we're going to send it back to the states and let the states decide. And by the way, there's a lot going on in that abortion area. Amazingly, remember they leaked the decision. Have you heard has anybody been punished for leaking the decision? And it's a pretty small group. I don't understand why they haven't released that, or whether maybe they haven't found it out. But I think it was a pretty egregious breach of the Supreme Court's operations that somebody leaked that. But amazingly, like as soon as the case comes out, the Biden administration is out there pushing the abortion pill that you can buy in clinics, and now they have FDA rules coming out to allow that essentially to be bought over the counter without a prescription at pharmacies. That's my understanding of what they're doing. And they don't have, I don't think they have, there are side effects to that particular medication, but it seems like side effects of medication, you can kind of get away with it now if you're big pharma on a number of cases. So watch that. So anyway, back to the Brunson case. So they filed a case to get people removed from office. The Supreme Court has, I don't believe the Supreme Court, well, here's the docket. And I don't think you'll see on there, they say a petition for writ of certiorari filed. You'll notice that in November, the United States waived its right to respond to the petition for writ of certiorari. Now, why would they do that? Well, my gut tells me I'm not involved. I don't work for the Department of Justice, who would have made that decision. But my guess is they think that the case is total nonsense. And so the government lawyers are sort of taking the position, we're not even going to bother to respond to this. We think it's so frivolous and not worthy of a response. So the case has been set for a conference. They've not granted the petition for writ of certiorari. If they grant the petition for cert, as we call it in the law, if they grant the cert petition, then they'll submit briefs. Then there will be a hearing. I would highly advise that people not get overly excited about this case. It is I would say it's a novel request. It's creative, but my personal gut feeling is I'll be very, very surprised if it goes anywhere. But let's say that the court accepted cert, argued the case, and the court what would the Supreme Court decide? Well, the Supreme Court's not going to grant the relief that's requested. They're not going to come in and they're not going to say all the members of Congress and the administration that didn't do their jobs have to be removed from office. What the best thing that will happen is that the Supreme Court, well, let's put it this way. I'll be surprised if the Supreme Court does that, takes it for review. I'll be really surprised if the court decides that the case has merit, and how the Supreme Court will decide the case has merit, or what they will do is they will send the case back to the district court in Utah where it was filed, and then that court will hold hearings and make a decision based on evidence that's presented. That's going to take time. So the earliest you would get a ruling out of the Supreme Court on a case like this would be mid-June. Then if it's granted and it's referred back to the state court, the court's going to have it for at least a year or so before it hears the case. That's just the way litigation goes. Unless you can show an extreme emergency, I just don't see that happening. And I've done hundreds of injunction cases and temporary restraining order cases. So then let's say they find in favor of the plaintiffs. Then the government will appeal. They will appeal that case, and it'll go to the Circuit Court of Appeals. That will have briefing and that type of thing. And eventually it will get back to the U.S. Supreme Court if the plaintiffs win, or if the plaintiffs lose in the federal district court in Utah, and then they lose at the Circuit Court of Appeals, and then they'll come back to the Supreme Court again. So you're talking at least 18 months to 2 years if everything went correct. So 2 years from now will be 2023, which will be what? After another presidential election. So I just don't see, I know everybody wants to get things changed. I just don't see it happening at this point. So I would just, my advice is follow the case, but don't get overly excited about it, because I just don't see anything happening soon in the sequence of events. Now, look, I could be totally wrong. And if I have to stand up here in a month and say, man, I blew that one, and I totally messed up, I didn't see it coming, I'll get up here and say I didn't see it coming. Right now, I'm looking at it from a legal standpoint. It's a creative, novel way to approach this matter. But, it didn't get filed for, a year or so after the election in 2020. So I just don't see it happening. So I hope that's clear. So I hope that answers questions. I'm not going to stand up here and tell you, hey, boy, this case, they're going to win this case and that'll make you very happy with me. But that's just not the way I do things. So I'm going to give you my opinion. And so this we had, this I just put this up for the graphic. This is from the Times of London. And you can see that, you know, everybody's interpreting this in the way they want to interpret this. This was horrible. This was great. McCarthy will be the weakest ever. Can't believe, you know, the Dan Crenshaw coming out with these ridiculous comments that the people that oppose McCarthy are terrorists. What happened to him? I'm serious. Somebody got to him. And I will tell you, I saw a video of Kevin McCarthy talking to Matt Gaetz in the hall of Congress there. I don't know what he said to him, okay? But Gaetz then decided to vote president. So McCarthy's been elected. And, you know, there were people that are on the populist side of these things that disagreed. Some voted for McCarthy, some didn't. So he's there, and we'll see what happens. But it's time to get to work, and if the Republicans want to do what I think people elected them to do, they'll go investigate these things. But understand, it's a divided Congress. The Senate's not going to do, I doubt that if they put up a bill, the Senate's going to roll in, which is controlled by Democrats, plus a bunch of rhinos that will vote their way. So the Republicans can investigate things. They can bring in people. They can bring in testimony. They can complete investigations that were never done. For example, on that one committee to investigate the last time what happened at the Capitol. But nobody's going to get prosecuted over that from the side that people who supported Trump. It's the people who oppose Trump. There's nobody going to jail, folks. Okay, it's not going to happen. And we can talk about Hillary Clinton. How's it going with her? Well, I've heard that the Clintons are now worth over $120 million. And she just got appointed to be a professor at Columbia University. So, now, look, somebody's being punished in that case. The students of Columbia University are being punished. But I don't think that's what we wanted. I'm just telling you is, buck up. Nobody's going to jail. As much as at least not until things change. And if things don't change in 2024 election, nobody's going to jail then, because you know who's in control of the Justice Department. That's just the hard reality of it. I want you to, I think I had a question I didn't answer the other day in my midweek update about the Davos meeting. That's going to start a week from tomorrow in Davos, Switzerland, and I will be following that. I don't know what they're going to do. I know that the Davos people have had a tremendous amount of scrutiny put on them. They used to sort of operate in silence. And it was back about 2017, 2018. I think it was really the big one was 2018 when Yuval Harari spoke and talked about what it meant to be human. They started talking more openly about artificial intelligence and what that means. And that kind of got all of our attentions. And as we've watched this over time, for example, they did put up on their Twitter account, things that they thought would happen by 2030. And one of the predictions was you'll own nothing and be happy. And now if you go to look for that on the World Economic Forum website, you're not going to find it. It's gone. But you can still find it. There's people, some of us have saved those clips. I have one I'll play in a sort of a compendium when we watch this in another week or so. But some of the things that they plan on artificial intelligence and, I don't know, for lack of a better term, editing DNA, and the goal is to always make things better. So we have this transhumanism thing that's really coming in big time. One of the things they talk about, they want to do a 15-minute city. Unless you're the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, his city that he's building, Neom, it's going to be a 5-minute city. Everything you need will be within 5 minutes of your house, so that you don't need to go anywhere. So we can still fly around in our private jets to these big conferences and that sort of thing because we're the elites and you are the peons and you don't need to go anywhere. You've got your food. You got a place to live. You don't own anything, but you're going to be happy. You are going to be happy. We're going to make you be happy. Well, maybe we'll just redefine what happy is. How about that? Just like they're redefining everything. I mean, this is a trend that I think that's going to continue. This is from the National up in Canada. And front page, Friday or Saturday, school aid student gender transition without telling their parents if requested. And this is what the agenda has been. You need to understand that this wokeism that's coming, critical race theory and wokeism and social justice and all of this, it really comes out of Marxism. And then when you get a book, if you want to read a couple good books, there's a book by Michael Walsh called The Devil's Pleasure Palace. It came out about 5 or 6 years ago. 6 years ago. And it's excellent. It talks about the development of critical theory. And critical theory, it's not just critical race theory, it's critical legal theory. And I was reading books about that when I was in graduate school 20 years ago times 2.5 almost. But but I remember reading this book on I had a professor, and he said, here, you need to read this. You have to read this book. It's part of my class. And I read it, and I gave him the answers that he wanted to prove that I read the book. But I told the professor, I was a graduate assistant, and he was in the office next door to mine that I shared with his grad assistant. I said, don't give me that garbage to read anymore. That stuff is nonsense. Well, shows what I know. I went to law school, and he went on to head a sociology department at a major university in the United States, but and probably taught the same nonsense. But Michael Walsh also wrote a book about Marxism, and when you really break it down, this Marxism and then the communism and all this stuff, Marxism had very satanic roots to him. Everything that he did was rooted in this being against God. And we see it playing out. And I think we see it playing out through school systems and that type of thing. The Manhattan Institute did a study recently about what they're teaching in high school. And so, for example, here, America is a systemically racist country. 36% of the students in high school that the Manhattan Institute surveyed had been taught that in class, 1 out of 3. 26% had heard it from an adult at school, and some said neither, about 29%, and then 9% don't know. And you'll see that there's about 9% don't know anything. In this, about 10%. In America, white people have white privilege, 41%. But if you add the first two together, on this first one, you've got 62%. This one, you got 76%. Is that right? 66%, about 2/3. Look at the one down here in the lower right-hand corner, and you can understand why there's this problem. Gender is an identity choice regardless of the biological sex you were born into. And you see that half the students have either been taught that or heard about it from an adult at school. And it's tearing down the fabric of society. This is the design. So when the World Economic Forum puts out something that says, you'll own nothing and be happy, they're going to redefine happy. They're redefining humanity. And you see this, they have their little false prophet, Yuval Harari, and he talks about these things. And if you don't like it, you're going to have to be re-educated. Think that's not true? Now, I said last week I had heard that Jordan Peterson had gotten saved and become a Christian. I don't know, okay? The jury's out on that. He still has a lot of psychology terms that he uses when he speaks. So pray for him. I like a lot of what he says. I played this thing that he said last week on ChatGPT, that OpenAI thing that's everybody's playing around with now. I would just advise you be very careful with this, because Elon Musk had said in one of his talks at one point that artificial intelligence was like opening up the demon world. And I think that there's a spiritual aspect to all of this that we need to be very careful about. But anyway, Jordan Peterson's very conservative, and he comes out and he's made some statements, and he's been very critical of Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, and some of the people in the government there. So what are they doing? Well, he's a licensed psychologist. So the Psychological Licensing Authority in Canada has come out and they've said, Dr. Peterson, if you want to continue with your license, you will have to go through an education program. You will have to pay for it. You will have to meet with a consultant, and you will have to pay for the consultant, whose fee is $235 an hour or something like that. And they will have to certify that you have gone through this re-education process and changed your mind. And if you don't, we're going to take your license to be a psychologist away in Canada. And The Spectator Australia has a great article on it. Canada to re-educate Jordan Peterson for wrongthink. Because of course, Justin Trudeau is right on everything. He's been through the Klaus Schwab school. His deputy prime minister and the head of Minister of Finance in Canada, Christina Freeland, which, given the lunatic ideas that she has about social control, having heard the name Freeland as an insult to her parents, or to that name. But, if you oppose these things, and this is what it says here, wokeism has destroyed Canada. We knew the situation was bad when Prime Minister Justin Trudeau froze the bank accounts of protesters in order to silence political action against his regime's appalling abuses of human rights. It became unsalvageable when Trudeau followed up his behavior by speaking about his love of China's dictatorial powers over citizens. It's not a cultural war. It is an ideological war. And it is a war against principalities and powers. We know that we're seeing what happened play out. Now, in Israel right now, they have a law that's going through the parliament, and it's to limit the powers of the Israeli courts, the Supreme Court. Prime Minister Netanyahu is still under indictment for graft bribery, corruption, and that type of thing. About a year ago, I was reading about this, and they thought, well, the cases will be over in about 5 years. If you think the wheels of justice grind slow in this country, they grind really slow in Israel. One of the cases against him is bribery, because he did things for newspapers and a newspaper in the hopes of getting favorable coverage. And the evidence is, by the way, that the coverage of him became less favorable, but they're still charging him with bribery for trying to act in a way that gets good press, which seems to be like, that's what every politician does, even the politicians you don't agree with, and we don't weaponize the legal system against them. But that's what they're doing. And the Supreme Court, I think, there has a number of problems. They've sort of set it up that they don't have a constitution in Israel. They have what they call basic laws. But the Supreme Court is sort of, well, we'll decide when a law is good or not. And we'll decide who's going to be on the Supreme Court. So it's sort of a self-appointed, they appoint their friends. They appoint people that are ideologically the same. And I think it's very corrupt. In fact, this is what somebody tweeted this week. The great jurist in the USA, Justice Antonin Scalia, once said, "I usually read rulings of the Supreme Court in Israel when I want to be really shocked, when I want to prove that my court is not so bad after all." And I think I would agree with Scalia. Iran is in the middle of a bit of a revolution. It started with protests by women. These two guys were executed. They were accused of killing someone in some of the protests, a police officer or something. But there's a bunch of other people. There's at least 9 people on death row. And so in Israel, they're talking about a fairly simple case, it seems like, against Netanyahu for bribery. It'll take 5 years. They're already executing people over these protests in Iran. Their justice system moves much more swiftly. And they're doing it to prove a point. And I don't know where this Iranian thing is going to go. That remains to be seen. We still have this problem in Ukraine and Russia at war. This happened earlier this week. A bunch of conscripts were in a building. They were put there, and apparently they were using their cell phones. Ukraine was able to tap into their locations. And it just so happened that the building had a large store of ammunition. They shot a couple of missiles, and I'm pretty sure they got the missiles from the United States, those HIMARS missiles. And it killed, Russia admitted to 63, but the word I've seen is that there were hundreds and hundreds killed or wounded in that attack. Germany and the US are sending things over. I think some of this is a mistake. They're ramping things up. This is economic. Apple value went down $1 trillion. Elon Musk now holds the record for the greatest amount of decline in his personal net worth. I think he's down like $200 billion. But I'm sort of like, so now he's only worth $100 billion. So does that really impact his lifestyle? I mean, so it used to be he could buy, a $5 million house every day. Now it's only like $4.8 million a day for the next, 1,000 years or something. It doesn't have that big of an impact, but it is a lot of money. Back to Ukraine, Russia, Putin is kind of coming out and making more statements about this is going to take a while. There's an article, it's in Foreign Policy today, or this week, high time to prepare for Russia's collapse, and you see all these stories about Putin's got cancer, he's going to die. And Foreign Policy kind of makes the case that if something happens to Putin, things may just go on like they were because he's pretty much removed everybody from any position of power in Russia that would disagree with him. So things are going to continue as they were, but some people think that if it goes badly, that Russia could break up. I don't know. That's one of the big questions. So this is one of the what I think is a controversy in Bible prophecy is this Russia part of this Ezekiel 38-39 alliance. I can make the case that it is based on some historical records and documents, but then I'm also a pragmatist, is that the Bible prophecies, we're certain how they're going to play out after they're fulfilled. That's sort of that's the gold standard test that we would apply to that. So Russia may or may not be involved. I think Turkey and Iran clearly involved in that invasion. And this goes to the logistics thing. I don't think Russia's performed that well in Ukraine. there's no, well, can't say that. At least we're not specifically aware of troops from like the NATO and that type of thing being involved directly on the ground in Ukraine. That may change in the very near future, and that would be a very provocative thing for the NATO countries to do. But, and you see these things where, Putin's got cancer and he's near death and that type of thing. And then I see him go to a meeting and he sits there on stage for 4 hours. You think my updates are long? I mean, a bunch of politicians and eggheads sitting around talking for 4 hours. China has a problem with Charlie Vector 019er. Hard to get good information. They are not putting out very good statistical, they're just not putting out a lot of statistics. And if someone passes away, they're not putting Charlie Vector as the cause on death certificates. But there's a lot of reports of people, big long lines at crematoriums and morgues and that type of thing. People having to keep bodies of dead relatives in their homes for 6-7 days because they can't get a spot to get rid of the body because everything's backed up, particularly in big cities like Beijing. And so now China's sort of getting a good dose of what they unleashed on the rest of the world, I guess is the best way of saying that. So now I want to talk a little bit about Israel and the Temple Mount specifically. Now, when I was in Israel a few weeks ago, there was clearly a lot of tension. So when my friend Brian and we went down to Hebron one day, we saw vehicles like this all over the place in Hebron. I mean, everywhere we went, particularly around checkpoints and in the Jewish section of Hebron, there were soldiers dressed like this in vehicles like this all over the place. And I mean, you can see these vehicles. They're armored. They have armor around the windows. They have electronics. The soldiers are fully decked out in electronic gear. But the narrative now is that because Israel has moved to the right, they're a bunch of terrorists, extremists, that sort of thing. It's the same narrative that happened here. And so I see these parallels between the U.S. and Israel quite a bit. And I think we're further down the road. I think Dennis Prager had a good column this week, or a show that he did this week, where he said, America now leads the world in exporting bad ideas. And even places like, remember last year, I think I reported that France was limiting U.S. professors coming to France because of the stupid ideas that they have. France. I mean, how bad is that? That's embarrassing. But it hasn't stopped anybody in the United States from doing that. And so, in Israel, I don't think they've got some of the leftism. And so what you're seeing is a split between liberals and leftists. And the leftists seem to be prevailing. And they're prevailing all over the world in a lot of cultures. And so, but the narrative will be, this is from the Financial Times in the UK, rightward shift rocks West Bank balance. Folks, so I'm 68. So I was born 6 years after the 1948 War of Independence for Israel. I was 13 when the 1967 war happened. I was in college when the Yom Kippur War happened in 1973. So I can say, in my 68 years of life on this earth, soon to be 69, this has been a problem the whole time. And it's been a problem when it's left-wing Israeli governments, and it's still a problem now. And so they're just now trying to turn it into something that it's not. But there's this narrative. They have people that are enemies. So this is a picture on the front page of the Tehran Times on January 4th, which was the day after the 30th anniversary of the assassination of General Soleimani. And so what do you see in these pictures? They have 5 cities, 5 cities, the big picture, Tehran, Kerman, Isfahan, Qom, and Arak. What do you see? Massive crowds out remembering the great martyr. You saw rallies in Lebanon with people mourning the loss of Soleimani, who was a really bad guy. And so what you see, I mean, he was always talking about getting rid of Israel. The Palestinian, this is a tweet from Daniel Rubenstein. Palestinian factions are in a state of civil war with each other. There are 2 Palestinian governments, multiple militant groups, and many regional rivalries. Instead of working out their differences, they're all clamoring to show who is the greatest defender of Al-Aqsa. And so when you see these pictures that are put in Western media like this, oh, look at how bad Israel is and what they're doing in the West Bank, understand don't know if you would call it open civil war yet in the Palestinian Arab society yet, but it's there. It's very divided. Just as it's divided in the Israeli government. There's a lot of really strong feelings about everything. This is an example. Now, I want you to think about this a little bit. So we know a little bit about Bible history around here. We talk about it a lot. We talk about archaeology. And there is this is essentially a spoon that was found in Israel. Someone was accused of having looted it, taken it out of the country when they shouldn't have. And so it's been in the possession of the United States government, our United States government. So they want to repatriate that artifact. And it was found in the area of the West Bank. Judea or Samaria. And here's a picture of how that, let's see. I had a picture of how things were divided. And now I'm not seeing it. Remember the Trump vision for peace. It was found in what they call the West Bank. Now, here's the question. Where is the capital of the state of Palestine? Look, I know it occupies space in the heads of people in charge of our State Department and Barack Obama. That's occupied territory. But there's no state of Palestine. So our State Department, actually this went through the Department of Homeland Security. Now I thought the Department of Homeland Security dealt with the United States homeland. So they sent this back to the Palestinian government, the Palestinian Authority. It's from 2,700 years ago. I know for a fact there was no Palestine 2,700 years ago. So 2,700 years ago would have been, 500 BC? There was no Palestine. There was an Israel back in those days. They'd come back from the Babylonian captivity by that time. There was Kingdom of Judah. This is what passes for good thought, I guess, in our country. By the way, this thing was found. this year. This is a pretty significant find. This is the Yahweh scroll, the cursed scroll that was found in a sifting project up at Mount Ebal. What happens is the Palestinians come in and they will, like they did at the Temple Mount, they excavated a large portion of the Temple Mount to build a mosque that would seat 20 or 30,000 people, or accommodate 20 or 30,000 worshipers. And so the Israeli government has had the Archaeological Antiquities Authority has had a sifting project to go through the debris that they excavated off of the Temple Mount. And they found some amazing archaeological finds, all of which, guess what, confirmed that Israel existed for a very long time. And this was a cursed scroll, and it is the earliest mention of Yahweh. It was found by Dr. Scott Stripling and some others up at Mount Ebal, which technically is in the West Bank. So I guess this is going to have to be repatriated to the Palestinians. What do you think, by the way, what do you think they're going to do with it? They'll destroy it if they get their hands on it. You know they will, because it proves the existence of Israel. So this week what we saw was Ben-Gvir went up on the Temple Mount. This is from the Financial Times. So even the Financial Times thinks this story is a big deal. But let's look at how they phrase it. Israel's security minister raises tensions with visit to holy site. Oh my. Wait a minute. A Jew went up on the Temple Mount and this raises the tension? And I'm telling you is, a lot of people think, yeah, this could cause a world war. And look they didn't call it the Temple Mount though, they called it the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. And I've showed you that the Muslim Waqf that was the custodian of the holy sites back in the 1920s put out a tour guide to the Temple Mount. And it said the fact that this is the site of Solomon's temple is beyond dispute. Now, they deny it. There's pieces of the temple and artifacts from the temple periods found all over up there, and they deny it. And believe me, they would, if they could, they'd get their hands on it and they would destroy the evidence. That's what they've been trying to do for a long time. This is from the Arab News talking about the sixth Netanyahu government, but not really his. It's controlled by right-wing extremists, and that's the narrative that you're going to hear now all the time. So Ben-Gvir on Tuesday went up to the Temple Mount. He is he's the Interior Security Minister. This is Israel Hayom newspaper. Everybody's upset about it. Abbas is upset about it. The King of Jordan is upset about it. Everybody, this is terrible. This is just awful. And so the stories in the newspaper, I mean, this is the National from the United Arab Emirates. Okay, United Arab Emirates, liberal, tolerant United Arab Emirates. This is one of their major newspapers. They're in the Abraham Accords with Israel. And so what do they say? Minister storms Al-Aqsa. I mean, he storms it. So let's see what it looked like when he went up there. Now this is pretty traumatic. We're in wars all over the world, and this is Israel storming the Temple Mount. And he got up there and he walked around a little bit. He was up there for 13 minutes. Here's a little video, and you can see that wave of international criticism. Ex-Mossad chief warns Ben-Gvir could ignite entire Middle East. So here's this little thing from the Times UK, a little clip about Ben-Gvir going up there.
ממשלת ישראל לא תיכנע לארגון של מרצחים, לארגון טרור שפל. הר הבית זה המקום הכי חשוב לעם ישראל. הר הבית פתוח לכולם. עולים כאן
The Temple
מוסלמים,
Mount should be open for everybody.
וכן,
Muslims
גם
come up here,
יהודים,
Christians, and yes,
גם
also
יהודים.
Jews, also
ממשלה
Jews.
שאני חבר בה לא תהיה אפליה
In the government
גזענית.
which I'm a member of, there won't be
יהודים
racist
יעלו להר
discrimination, and
הבית,
Jews will visit the
אנחנו
Temple
מבהירים
Mount. We make it
לחמאס.
clear to
אנחנו לא
Hamas,
נכנעים,
we
לא
don't give in,
מתקפלים,
we
לא
don't surrender, we
ממצמץ.
don't blink. And this is a serious threat to
إن
stability in the
اقتحام
region.
الوزير
This is
الإسرائيلي
a
بن غفير
Palestinian.
للمسجد الأقصى المبارك صباح اليوم يشكل تحدي خطير لمشاعر جميع أبناء الشعب الفلسطيني.
And he just wants Jews to have more access up there. He's been up there many times, by the way. But look at the headlines. This is from the Arab News, Mid-East crisis, because he walked around up there for 13 minutes. How dare he, right? If you want, there's a good interview with Yishai Fleischer, who I know, on the BBC. I won't play a clip of it today, but if you want to understand where he's the English spokesperson for Ben Gvir, go look it up. You might be able to find it on Yishai Fleischer, Fleisher, or his wife Malka, Malkah. She posted it on her Twitter account, and it's excellent. I mean, I have to say I agree with him. You know, the Jews have a history in the land, but this happens all the time. You remember, this is a New York Times from September 29th, 2000. What happened? Oh my goodness, it was just unbelievable. Ariel Sharon, the prime minister of Israel, accompanied by 1,000 military and security personnel, went up there. By the way, do I recall correctly that Bill Clinton went to Jerusalem and the Muslim religious authorities would not let him up on the Temple Mount? They closed the gate. I think that happened. I have to check. But Ariel Sharon went up there, and they ended up with a thing they call the Intifada. And they've had two of them, and I know a couple thousand Israeli Jews were killed, or Israelis were killed. Even Turkey came out. So this is from the New York Times, September 29th, 2000. Turkey condemned the provocative act by Ben Gvir, forgetting the fact that Erdogan in 2005 went up to the Temple Mount. By the way, he went to the Yad Vashem and he wouldn't put on a kippah, which is like, you just don't do that unless you're Erdogan. By the way, around the same time that Erdogan was, a couple days before he was there, the great ally Putin went to see Arafat's grave and to meet Abbas in Ramallah. That was in 2005. That was near the end, what everybody thought was going to be near the end of the first term, a 4-year term of Abbas, and he's still serving that term today. So he's in around the 17th year. Maybe he was just elected then. Anyway, he's now in about the 20th year of his first-year term. Pretty good politician. This is I forget which the organization is. This is their flag. This is what they want to do. Now, first of all, do you see what they're planning on? So to the left, that's Israel. All of Israel, not just the West Bank. And over here you have Jordan, which is about 80% Palestinian Arabs. The wife of King Abdullah II is a Palestinian. And they want them to return. Where do they want them to return? They want them to return west of the Jordan River. They want to take it over. And so they get upset. This is an editorial from one of the Arab newspapers. You know, the settlements. This is the Israeli cabinet meeting, and they're getting ready to build more settlements. Imagine that, Jews wanting to live in Judea and Samaria. And they do so at great risk. Jordan, I think I'll play in a midweek update. So you can go to the UN website, if you want to follow what goes on at the UN, if you want to torture yourself, they put everything up. I'm telling you, there's videos about everything now. Unless it's something that really exposes what people really are, like some of the Davos and World Economic Forum stuff, those get pulled down. Sort of like, ooh, well, that sounded pretty good to us in our echo chamber. You know, it's sort of like everybody sounds good in the shower, right? Because of the echo and everything. And so there's an echo chamber. And the World Economic Forum, it sounds great when everybody's there and clapping when we say it, and then it gets out there and it doesn't really fly with people who have things like slightly above average intelligence and common sense and that sort of thing. It just doesn't sound right. So at the UN, so if you want to go to the UN website or just type in UN multimedia, it will take you to the website and you can scroll down. There's a little tab for web TV, and you can see every video that they put up, all their press conferences, UN Security Council meetings, and you can go to the one that took place on Thursday, so that would have been January 6th. They had a meeting, and they all gave speeches. I'll play it in a midweek update or next Sunday, the speech that was given by the Israeli ambassador. But the Israeli ambassador, and I apologize, I cannot remember his name right now. It was superb. It was absolutely superb. You should go listen to it, or be sure you watch for my update when I play it. But one of the things he said was, here we sit in a world where Russia's invading Ukraine. They're at war. Everybody's getting drawn into it. Iran is going through a revolution. There's conflicts in Africa. There's increasing tensions in Kosovo and Serbia and Europe. But because an Israeli minister went up to the Temple Mount, which he's done many, many times before, the World Security Council has to have almost a day full of meetings about it, about how terrible it is, and this is provocative. And during his speech, he made an interesting comment. He said, this reminds me, what we're doing here at the UN Security Council today, reminds me of the Jerry Seinfeld show, where George and Jerry got an offer from NBC to write a show, a script. That was part of the thing. And you remember, it's one of their classic episodes. And it says, and Jerry and George says, what's your show about? When they met with it's a show about nothing. Well, what do you mean it's a show about nothing? Well, what did you do today? I got up and went to work. That's a show. But nothing happened. That's why it's a show. Nothing happens. And so, and he said, this is like the Seinfeld show now. It's a meeting about nothing. I thought it was a brilliant point. Now, if you don't understand the Seinfeld show, you wouldn't think about this. This is from earlier this year in Haaretz. A war over the Temple Mount is just a matter of time. The messiahs of the right, this is when things were leading up to the election. The messiahs of the right are correct when they attempt time after time to burst into Haram al-Sharif, to establish Israeli sovereignty there. In their eyes, the main thing is not prayers, but sovereignty, control, ownership, authority. And you can go back in Haaretz, you can go back to 2014. They said, this is going to ignite, there's I thought I had the history of the Temple Mount. This is from 2014 in the left wing, Haaretz. The history of the Temple Mount, where gods collide. How Little Hill in Jerusalem, venerated over millennia, became a powder keg that threatens to engulf the whole world in war. And so during this speech that the Israeli ambassador gave at the UN, he said, listen, from 1948 to 1967, this was controlled by Jordan. Everybody in the world knows that that's a fact. Jordan controlled that area of Israel, west of the Jordan River, now called the West Bank. But guess what? The Jordanian ambassador came out, Jordan as the government has come out and said, we never controlled the West Bank. We might have been helping out the Palestinians, but we didn't really have anything to do there. Yet the king goes around, he goes on CNN and says, this is a red line because I'm the custodian of the holy sites in Jerusalem, the Christian and Muslim holy sites. And he never says what he really should say, the Christian, Muslim, and Jewish holy sites he claims to be a custodian of. But listen, does not Bible prophecy talk about this being a flashpoint in the end times that will cause a war, that will, and it is. We're seeing it happen right in front of our eyes. So they had the UN security, UAE and China call for Al-Aqsa debate at UN. We got to solve this. Did you see that guy up there? He walked on stones. I'm surprised there wasn't a big earthquake. Nonsense. What happened to UAE, Netanyahu was supposed to go to the United Arab Emirates for his first meeting of his sixth go at being sixth government in which he's become the prime minister. The UAE canceled it over this. Oh, they're big on the Abraham Accords, right? They're all for us, right? Well, not always. And the reports are that Netanyahu was actually shocked that this had happened. So here's our spokesperson for our State Department, our Secretary of State has come out for this, and here's his spokesperson talking about this at a press briefing the other day.
Let me say broadly on the first question that the United States stands firmly for preservation of the historic status quo with respect to the holy sites in Jerusalem. We oppose any unilateral actions that undercut the historic status quo. They are unacceptable. The president has previously underscored the need to preserve that historic status quo at the Haram al-Sharif Temple Mount, as has the secretary. We have done so repeatedly with our Israeli partners. We have done so repeatedly with our Jordanian partners, whose special role as custodian of Muslim holy places in Jerusalem, we deeply appreciate. That is a message we will continue to reinforce.
The second question.
Can we continue with the Palestinian?
Sure, and I'll come back to that in a second question.
Okay, look, first of all, Happy New Year
Happy New
to
Year.
everybody. You constantly state the same statements and so on, but there is no action. If you continue to do this, this is what we will do. So what will you do if they continue to do this? Abbas just called on his ambassador to the UN to call for a Security Council meeting, for instance. Will you support that? Will you support the Palestinian effort at the Security Council to pursue this issue?
Saeed, look,
We affirm your position.
we are going to take actions and we are going to use our voice in a way that serves to de-escalate tensions. That ultimately is what we want to see happen, a de-escalation of tensions. We all know that tensions within Israel, within the West Bank, have become inflamed, not only over recent days, but of course in recent months. And we've pointed to that for many months now, including the unprecedented levels of violence that have claimed far too many lives, including those of children. As I said before regarding this visit, we're deeply concerned by any unilateral actions that have the potential to exacerbate tensions, precisely because we want to see the opposite happen. We want to see tensions reduced. We want to see tensions diminish. We know that the exceedingly rare instances of previous high-profile visits to Haram al-Sharif Temple Mount have only exacerbated tensions. This is not an academic question. We have seen what has transpired in the past, and we continue, as I said before, to strongly support the long-standing historic status quo at the site. By the way, we also...
Okay. By the way, Washington is sort of in the northern part of the United States, right? I mean, it's not like it's in the deep south. Where's he getting that tan in January? And he's working really hard on this, right? So Palestinians feel a purge. This is from the United Arab Emirates, the National. So listen, what about the status quo? So listen, this is an inscription found recently in a place called Hezekiah's Tunnel. Now listen, this is in Jerusalem, and there is no doubt this tunnel was built by King Hezekiah. He was king in Judah before the Assyrians took over the northern kingdom. So here's my point, is why do we want to go to 1949 and restore the status quo? I mean, do we restore the status quo down in Hebron where the Jews weren't allowed to go to the tomb of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and their wives for 700 years? Is that the status quo we want? How about maybe we just go back to like 725 BC, right? And restore that status quo. Or how about the status quo when there was a temple in Jerusalem before 70 AD? So this is Hezekiah's tunnel. This is an inscription found. And I won't go through the translation, but it confirms stuff in the Bible from 700 BC or before. Recently found. There's no doubt what's going on here. How about we restore the status quo when that was written? So listen, to the nations of the world, I can only say this. The status quo, Jesus is going to come back and he's going to establish the status quo. And you might as well start thinking about it in your mind because you're not going to like it, but it's going to be taken care of at some point. Okay? That's my opinion. Now, in the Jerusalem Post the other day, how can Israel win the Palestinian conflict? Historian explains. And I regret that I did not go up and talk to him while I was there. I thought I would have a chance, and it just never. I saw him at breakfast a couple days. This is Seth Fransman did an interview with Daniel Pipes. And I want to read a little bit about this because Daniel Pipes has an interesting perspective on this. He's run the Middle East Forum for many years. And I guess he was in Jerusalem, according to this article by Seth. And I don't know, I thought he lived there. And I saw him at breakfast at the hotel a couple of mornings, and I just didn't. Well, I was talking to other people. I know I'm kind of shy in big groups like that. And so I was talking to other people, and I just never got over there. So with Israel's new government installed, the country stands at a crossroads. After a year and a half of a government that was rooted in the center-left, a right-wing coalition has come to power. Netanyahu's held power in the past. However, there is also a chance for Israel to take new steps that would shift its long-term trajectory and also that of the Palestinians. And everybody's talking about peace. Got to have the two-state, got to do the two-state. Everybody's doing the two-step about the two-state. Toward this end, Seth writes, American historian Daniel Pipes, who has been president of the Middle East Forum since its founding in 1994, is working on a book about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He recently visited Israel to meet with key people and also discuss his visions for Israel's victory in the current conflict. So he said, tell us why you're in Jerusalem. He says, well, I met a publisher who suggested writing a book about ending the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. How could I say no? I started in late September and hope to have it finished within the year. I am in Israel to ask questions of a range of people about Israeli perceptions on the project. What's your argument, Seth asked. Here's his argument. That a just resolution of the conflict requires the Palestinians to lose hope. Only when they give up their war goal of eliminating Israel will the conflict come to an end. Israel must win and the Palestinians must lose. This argument may come as a surprise because it precisely contradicts the premise of the Oslo Accords, the brainchild of Bill Clinton and others, which promoted not victory, but a notion of Palestinian hope and compromise. It theorized that nice apartments, late model cars, fine schools, and excellent medical care would vest the Palestinians in prosperity, de-radicalize them, and make them true partners for peace. But nearly 30 years on, all polling and endless anecdotal evidence indicate that most Palestinians retain the fantasy of eliminating the Jewish state. That goal must be fought by making them abandon it, not by fueling it with hope. This fits a general pattern as wars seek to make the enemy despair of his hopes. The Oslo Accords of 1993 are discredited and nearly forgotten, created by the Palestinians and Israelis alike. Nobody believes in it. Despite that, its core goal of enriching Palestinians remains very much alive. For example, the Trump Peace to Prosperity plan offered the Palestinians $50 billion in return for their leaving Israel alone. I just met with Avigdor Lieberman, and even spoke of wanting to replace jihad, and he spoke of wanting to replace jihad with prosperity and to turn Gaza into the Singapore of the Middle East. The same approach also extends to Arab states, as shown by Israel's recently signing a wildly generous maritime boundary agreement with Lebanon. I wish I'd gone up to him and talked to him. Because what I would say is, I agree. I agree with you, Dr. Pipes. The war was never won in 48 and in 67. And even though Jordan controlled the West Bank and the old city of Jerusalem for almost 20 years, they destroyed the Jewish quarter. Go to the Jewish quarter today. All the buildings are pretty new compared to everything else in Jerusalem. Why? Because the Jordanians destroyed them. They wouldn't even let Jews go to the Western Wall to pray. They dumped garbage in there. That's the status quo that King Abdullah II of Jordan wants. Despite all the historical evidence. So let me do this. When I get up in the morning, I think, I don't think I'm going to go very long today. How's that working out? So this is the Temple Mount. This is from looking to the north. You see the Al-Aqsa Mosque there along the southern wall, the Dome of the Rock, building platform. The eastern gate is that little dome along the right wall there, about midpoint on the picture on the right. That's where they want to turn that into a mosque. And next to that, at least I wanted to go up there and look, but it was closed, so I couldn't. But there's wood beams up there that back in 2013 or 2014, Biblical Archaeology Review published a thing and said, hey, we think those beams are from the first and second temples. And they're still there. They're dated to that time. Oh, and by the way, they're cedars from Lebanon. I think I read about that. This is looking towards the northeast. You see the Western Wall there. And then those buildings there, you see the Western Wall. Underneath there is this incredible complex that they've excavated, showing bridges that Herod had built to the Temple Mount 2,000 years ago. It's if you're ever there, in those arches there, the upper level of arches there on the left, the Western Wall Heritage Foundation has great tours. They have the Great Stone Tour, and they also have a Great Bridge Tour, and I'd highly recommend either one of them. Will just blow your mind. By the way, there's gates all around the Temple Mount. Jews and Christians and non-Muslims can only use this one on the bridge here in the lower right-hand corner. This is looking to the west from the area of the Mount of Olives. No, I'm sorry, this is looking to the north, my bad. This is an aerial shot. By the way, the Pool of Siloam is way down here. See it right here? And then there would be this processional road. There it is. I did put an arrow there. That's where they want to excavate that, and there's a processional road then that will go from that. And I do think that this is prophetically significant. Because when I read the prophecies in Daniel and Thessalonians and Matthew, it looks like there's a temple, at least a place of sacrifice up there. And I go to Israel and the people are talking this, hey, we want millions of pilgrims to come here, Christians and Jews, to walk from here up to the Temple Mount where the temple was and where the temple will be. Do you understand the significance of this? These are the stones that Jesus would have walked. At his time, they're uncovering it. They want to open it up. So yeah, I think that's prophetically significant. Here it is. This is looking towards the west. You can see over here to the left, upper left of the picture, that's the Jewish quarter. And you can see just by looking at it, all the buildings are pretty new there because they've all been built since 1967 because the Jordanians destroyed them. Regardless of what their government says, they controlled everything. So here's just a quick primer on the Temple Mount. Now, the traditional view is that the temple stood where the Dome of the Rock is. The Holy of Holies would have been there. So here's looking down on the Temple Mount. Here's a little cutout I made of the temple. The Holy of Holies would have been over the rock that's under the Dome of the Rock. Another view would be that the temple was actually a little bit further north over a place called the Dome of the Tablets. And you can see that there's a little dome up here just north of that's the southern. I got these mixed up. Okay, so here's another view that it was over the Al-Qas fountain, which is between Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock. There's a fountain there. And this has some decent views. By the way, I'm not going to show you pictures of a temple being in the city of David because I just don't think that view holds much historical weight. I'm sorry. You're entitled to believe that if you want. You can still be my friend. I have friends that are wrong about stuff all the time that disagree with me, and it's okay. But interesting, this view has kind of an interesting aspect to it because in the ancient world, there were these great architects. So when you look at a city like Sardis, you go to Sardis and then you look at a place like Baalbek, where Romans built temples in Lebanon, you're going to find that they kind of look alike. And it's interesting that if you go to Baalbek, people have gone and they've drawn a schematic of what that area looks like. Baalbek, Lebanon, up where Hezbollah runs things. So if you flip that around, okay, you flip that and you take that, you can see that I've overlaid a transparency of that on the Temple Mount. You see the octagon thing up there? And you see it right there? It's almost the exact same size. And the temple is down here, and there's a holy building there that's 8-sided, just like the Dome of the Rock. And then there's an emperor statue right where the Al-Qas fountain is. And so some people think, oh, that's where the Holy of Holies was, because the Romans, when they came in here, they wanted to desecrate it and make a statement about who's in charge, just like the Muslims don't want the Jews to build the temple under the Dome of the Rock. And in fact, in the Dome of the Rock, by the way, there's panels, some of the oldest, maybe the oldest examples of the Quran, where things are written out. And one of the panels said, God has no son. So if we talk about abomination of desolation, there's one right there already you can go to. So this is from the Western Wall Tunnels tour, and they show all of these things, the structures that were these great bridges and stuff that were built at the time. You see this. There's mikvahs down there, which you don't put mikvahs in where there's the Roman soldiers don't use them. They're used for ritual bathing, just like the Pool Siloam is believed to be a very large mikvah. So this shows a little depiction of the destruction of the temple in 70. And then they've got the synagogue down there. It's a very interesting structure. This is in the Western Wall tunnels underneath those buildings that I showed you. And you see there is the, these are the Herodian stones that you see down there. These are the same stones that are on the exposed Western Wall. So, interesting stuff. So I think this is coming. They're excavating. This is the city of David. This is the procession, Pilgrim Road. I think this is coming. So I've got one more, I promise, one more thing. Might take an hour. No, one more thing to talk about. So this is a little graphic that I prepared regarding Syria. There's a lot going on in Syria right now. So Jonathan Spire, who I was fortunate enough to have dinner with, and I talked to him about this, he wrote an article in the Jerusalem Post this past Friday. The Mideast enters 2023, where and what to watch. And as we discussed at dinner, so go to the Jerusalem Post, look up this article, The Mideast enters 2023, where and what to watch. And you will, Jonathan is one of the best Middle East conflict correspondents out there, maybe the best. So it's called Behind the Lines. Is change for better or worse likely in the year ahead? Here are 3 Middle East arenas to watch carefully in the months ahead. So he says there are 3. There's Iran. We talked a little bit about that today. I think Jonathan thinks, not sure how far that's going to go because they don't have a really defined strong leader. There are some indications that some people in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard are sort of backing off, doing the regime's bidding. The second one would be, I think, Russia and Ukraine. Iranian uprising. Well, then the Israeli relation with the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. That's an important one. And then he said, against this backdrop, Israel's campaign to prevent Iranian entrenchment and consolidation over Syria's ruins has continued apace. There are now indications that the diplomacy of the Syrian war is once more on the move. Specifically, Turkey appears to be edging towards rapprochement with the Assad regime and alliance with it against what they regard as the PKK-controlled Kurdish area, and Erdogan views them as terrorists. Ankara appears to be considering returning its own area of control to the Assad regime. So on the northern border up there, you see with the armored vehicle with the Turkish flag, Turkey has like 114 military outposts up there along that border. In recent weeks, Erdogan has been threatening a renewed military offensive against the Syrian Kurds. U.S. and Russian pressure appear to have deterred him. A Russian-brokered diplomatic process is now underway, intended to result in a summit between Erdogan, Putin, and Assad before summer. Erdogan faces general elections in June 2003 and would clearly like to be able to present diplomatic achievements on Syria before that time. And the benefit also would be Putin will be seen as a peacemaker in the Middle East. And that's kind of interesting. So there's conflict, there's tension between Russia and Iran in Syria. Iran's trying to do everything. The Israeli military really views Lebanon as not so much Hezbollah controlled, but Iranians controlling Hezbollah in Iran. And that's a very tense area. And everybody I talk to expects conflict to erupt there in the near future. Maybe now more so since Netanyahu has come back to power. And then you have the drone thing, and that plays into the Ukraine-Russia war. So very interesting times. Listen, all this stuff is coming together. So I'll do a midweek. I'll talk a little bit more about this and play the UN Security Council briefing that took place for the speech by the Israeli ambassador. So let's pray. Lord, thanks for your prophetic words so that we can understand and analyze how these things are coming together and preparing us for what will be the glorious return of Jesus Christ to set up his kingdom, to bring all of this to a glorious end. We pray that you will give us opportunities to share the gospel with those around us. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.